Good afternoon. I call to order the July 23rd, 2024 regular meeting of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. For the record, my name is Marie Bjornberg and I serve as chair of the commission. Just a reminder to silence your cell phones and other electronic devices and to speak clearly into the microphone when speaking at the dais or giving testimony. Would the clerk please call roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum?
Commissioner Booty.
Present.
Fisher.
Present.
Hare.
Present.
Howard.
Present.
Corrado is absent. Maston is absent. Melblom is absent. Merrill.
Present.
Vice Chair Sandbolt is absent. Chair Bjornberg.
Present.
There are 6 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum and that Commissioners Maston, Corrado, Melblom, and Sandbolt provided proper notice that they have a conflict and their absence is excused. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for this meeting. We will work from the agendas that are available by the clerk. Item number 4 is 2125 Milwaukee Avenue, Ward 6. This application is for a certificate of appropriateness. Item number 4 will be on consent unless someone wants to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation. Item number 5 is Historic District Design Guidelines for the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District, Ward 2. Item number 5 will be discussed. So the proposed agenda is the consent agenda, which will include item number 4, 2125 Milwaukee Avenue, Ward 6. Is there any opposition from commissioners to the staff recommendations for these items? Is there anyone in the public that wishes to speak in opposition to these items? Hearing no opposition to placing these items on consent, we will approve the consent items in one motion at the start of the meeting. The following item will have staff presentation, public comment, and commission discussion and action. Item number 5, Historic District Design Guidelines for the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District, Ward 2. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the proposed agenda?
Howard so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Is there a second?
Second, Merrill.
Thank you, Merrill. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? The agenda is approved. Our next order of business will be to approve the minutes from our July 9th, 2024 meeting. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Fisher so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Is there a second?
Merrill so second.
Thank you, Commissioner Merrill. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Any abstentions, including commissioners who were absent? The minutes are approved. Before I open the hearing to public comments, let me summarize the process for conducting the public hearing. First, we will act on the consent agenda we just set. Once items on the consent agenda are approved, the commission is done with those items and applicants may contact the planning staff tomorrow about next steps. After the consent agenda are approved, we will take the remaining agenda item. Planning staff will present its report and commissioners may ask questions of staff. Then I will open the public hearing and we will invite public comment. If you wish to speak, you need to do 2 things. Please be sure to sign up on the sheet over by the clerk. If you haven't done this already, you can do so afterwards. When you come up to testify, you must state your name and address for the record. Please keep your comments specific to the application before us today. I may limit comments to 2 minutes each and ask that you focus on new information not already presented. If you have materials to hand out, please give them to our committee clerk so that they can be distributed to the commission and entered into the record. Do not approach the commissioners at the dais. After the public comments are complete, I will close the hearing and commissioners will deliberate and act on the item before us. I will now open the public hearing on the consent agenda item number 4, 2125 Milwaukee Avenue, Ward 6. Again, do commissioners oppose staff recommendations for this item? Are there members of the public who oppose staff recommendations for this item? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing on the consent agenda item. May I have a motion to approve staff findings and recommendations for this item?
Howard so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Is there a second?
Merrill, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Merrill. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Any abstentions? These items are approved as recommended by staff on the agenda. Applicants may contact planning staff about next steps. Our next item is item number 5, Historic District Design Guidelines for the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District, Ward 2. The staff report will be presented by Rob Skalecki.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg, and good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Rob Skalecki, Senior City Planner in the Historic Preservation section of Planning. Today I'm presenting the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District Design Guidelines for the HPC to vote on adoption. So I want to start with this understanding that this, project has been going on for a while. I know this has gone before you. It came before HPC in February of this year for comments. So with that too, I just want to give a bit of background on the district and how staff understand the designation and how we approached the design guidelines because of that. So this is all recorded too in the staff report, but I just want to kind of give an overview of that as well. So the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District was designated by City Council in July 2015. The district that was ultimately adopted by City Council, however, differed from staff's original recommendation to the Heritage Preservation Commission for the historic district. So the historic district's significance was studied in 2015 under designation criteria for social history, association to significant persons, neighborhood identity, architecture, and unique landscape design or development patterns. The designation study that was drafted for the district at that time did recommend a period of significance for the district that went from 1899 to 1972. And that was recommended by CPED staff for designation to the HPC in 2015. Also at that time, 2 geographical boundaries and areas of significance, which were the streetcar era, which went from 1899 to 1929, and the streetcar era and post-war era inclusive, which went from 1899 to 1979, were suggested as part of that 2015 designation study. But I will note that the streetcar era boundaries did fit entirely within that later post-war era boundaries, and you can see the boundaries here. Therefore, the district that was proposed with the 1899 to 1972 boundaries did go to HPC on June 9th, 2015. To the Heritage Preservation Commission meeting. The HPC did approve this district and the period of significance at their meeting. The designation then went to Zoning and Planning Committee of City Council for their vote on June 25th, 2015. At that meeting, a council member did propose an amendment to limit the district to the 1899 to 1929 boundaries, and Zoning and Planning Committee approved this change. So the action went to City Council for their adoption on July 10th, 2015, and it was adopted, signed by the mayor, and published on July 18th, 2015. So the staff wants to kind of emphasize that the published designation resolution only does record this 1899 to 1929 period of significance. So I know that's something we've heard from community members in the past about, how that kind of changed when it went through the designation study from studying it from a larger period of significance to a smaller one, and ultimately reducing the boundaries with that. But staff just wants to note that that designation resolution is final and that is recorded in that resolution that was published in 2015. Since 2015, the City of Minneapolis has used the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation to evaluate changes within the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District. So previous drafts of the design guidelines were developed since 2015, but none of these drafts were able to capture that really complex nature of the district's designation and meet the community input that was heard while also being consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. So in late 2015, CPED staff did hold 2 public meetings after commencing the project to draft the design guidelines. So in late 2015, we had 2 public meetings, one in person and one virtual, to get public feedback on this new push to develop the design guidelines for this district. Staff received comments from community members through online inputs. We had an online input form on our website and also email. And comments that were specific to the draft of the design guidelines at that time were considered by CPED staff and were made, changes were made to accommodate those concerns that were raised with those comments at that time. So staff do recognize the unusual circumstance that took place to designate this district for only that 1899 to 1929 streetcar era history in 2015. Staff acknowledged that the district had to be viewed through a different lens in order to develop viable guidelines that follow the historic character of the streetcar era and reflect that eclectic nature of the historic district that gained notability in the second half of the 20th century, but could not be included within that district designation in the period of significance. So the draft, the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District Design Guidelines offer existing buildings and new construction differentiation. So the guidelines do not differentiate between contributing and non-contributing buildings, just again to emphasize the existing historic features and allow for that flexibility to accommodate those community member concerns about what happened with the designation of the district. Many of the district's buildings have had alterations since 1899 to 1929, which make traditional design guidelines processes through contributing and non-contributing status quite difficult. So treatment guidance for existing buildings is recommended equally for all properties in the draft of the design guidelines, and this is to manage change and also preserve historic integrity. Staff would also like to note that this really shouldn't be seen as unusual, since the Secretary of the Interior standards also do not prescribe different treatments depending on a building's contributing or non-contributing status. So staff hope that the existing buildings and new construction categories makes the document easier to approach and read for property owners. Staff did consider many things while developing the design guidelines. A few of these are highlighted in the staff report. So I think the big one that we've stressed before is that the current draft that is being presented to you today is consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, which are the federal historic preservation property treatment recommendations. The guidelines do include a map and inventory of contributing and non-contributing resources that were developed from additional staff research and evaluation that took place since that 2015 designation resolution. Staff did conduct additional research to help identify historic features dating from 1899 to 1929 that are remaining in the district. Again, guidance is not differentiated or is not specific and differentiated between existing buildings and new construction. And also guidance is provided for mechanical equipment, trash enclosures, and public realm infrastructure in the final draft of the design guidelines. As stated before, at the February 13th, 2024 meeting, the HPC did comment on the draft design guidelines, and you did highlight a few areas of concern, so staff have revised those in the guidelines in response to these concerns. Per the local preservation ordinance, the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District Design Guidelines were submitted to the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Office on March 1st, 2024. On April 9th, 2024, the State Historic Preservation Office replied favorably on the guidelines, and their comments were included as an attachment for Commissioner consideration. Staff would also like to note that we did receive a few public comments that were included for the HPC to consider. One was from a local community organization that has been present and active throughout this process, and another was from the University of Minnesota on their comments regarding the design guidelines. With that, the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development recommends that the Heritage Preservation Commission adopt staff findings and adopt the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District Design Guidelines, and recommend the motion to adopt the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District Design Guidelines. With that, I'm available as staff for any questions about the design guidelines, but I do believe that there are some members of the public here who may want to speak as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Commissioners, are there questions for staff? Commissioner Howard.
Thank you. I apologize, I was not at the February meeting, so this might have been part of the discussion that you had in February. I'm curious as to why there's a list of contributing and non-contributing if the guidelines apply equally to them all.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Howard, that's a good question. Developing a list of contributing and non-contributing buildings was kind of one of the initial parts of diving into the design guidelines. And I think in doing that, and when staff was looking at the amount of changes that were made, some of the information that wasn't known at the time that the district was being designated and that designation study was being drafted, making a list of contributing and non-contributing resources is pretty standard to include in design guidelines, as you may be aware. But I think compiling that and putting that in there was really the first step. And then from that point, staff realized that, okay, there's a different way that we could approach this district, just given what we know, its current history, the community connections to it, how it was designated. So I think, to answer your question, developing that list of contributing and non-contributing, I think we assumed was coming first, and it did. And then from there, I think we realized that we could look at the district a bit differently.
So since it's not actually being used within the district guidelines, is there a need to keep it in the document?
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Howard, I would leave that up to you. I think, as staff said, it's a decision that we like to make, when we do have districts. I think because this one was designated and, for that larger period of significance, it was studied. So the work that kind of recognized that history from 1930 to 1972 had to be reconsidered. So at this point, staff understand that as the guidelines are written, it does allow flexibility, but it is kind of more of a formal thing that we do with districts that are contemporary districts.
Well, and it's best practice to do that, but it's also best practice to have guidelines that specifically talk about what you do to contributing versus non-contributing buildings, which we don't have in this document. I disagree with staff's interpretation of how the standards are applied on non-contributing properties. And I've stated that in numerous other meetings about other design guidelines. My other question was related to varsity theater, since that seems to be a concern that showed up in quite a few of the public comments. Is that not individually eligible or considered a potential individual landmark or National Register property?
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Howard, that's a good question. That's a good point. That's something that we have relayed to the community, that if this were to come forward to look at for individual landmark status, it is something that we would consider for individual landmark status. We understand that there was a theater there, I think dating back to the 19-teens, the University Theater, and it was those late 1930s alterations that made it a non-contributing resource, unfortunately, under the current period of significance. So
yeah, thank you for that. And we know that Liebenberg and Kaplan's work in Uptown, for example, is considered significant. So thank you.
Are there other questions for staff? Commissioner Merrill.
Mr. Skalecki, trying further to understand contributing and non-contributing buildings, there seems to be in the comments from the neighborhood, a increased vulnerability if a building is considered non-contributing, since you have stated that there is no difference, and reference Commissioner Howard's comments. Is it, if there is no difference, the community sees that there is a difference, but does it make non-contributing buildings more vulnerable to demolition?
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Merrill, as far as the review processes that are taken into account when a building would potentially come through for demolitions, that is the same for any property in this historic district, so it would still come in front of you all for a public hearing. So if that were the case, you are able to consider individual significance, within that, and that's something that staff might point out if something would come forward in that situation.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that we have comment from staff.
Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Mayor, I want to add to Rob's comment about that. Rob Skelly did not state that there is no difference between contributing and non-contributing. There is definitely a difference between contributing and non-contributing. There is. That's an established practice, as Commissioner Howard said. What he is alluding to is that there still is a contributing and non-contributing status for this district. There has to be. It's a standard practice to approach designation studies and as a pre-step to design guidelines. What we found in developing these design guidelines is that this district has such a high number of alterations. It made it incredibly difficult to use a contributing, non-contributing status because the ratio was almost equal. And so we chose a different approach to do existing buildings and new construction as a way to balance it out so that we could provide guidelines that were, as he said, a little bit more easily approachable or easily understandable by the lay person so that we could understand this district. Because if we approach it as contributing and non-contributing, there's such a high volume of alterations, we are having trouble trying to write them for contributing and non-contributing, which we did have a draft that did do that. However, it looks so similar for contributing and non-contributing, we decided to go with, let's go with existing buildings, do a broader swath so we can actually include more, and then still, like, the contributing and non-contributing still applies in the overall way that it's looked at, and design review is approached just like we do for every other district that either has an identified contributing, non-contributing, or a district that doesn't have that. And it does come into play, for example, if a demolition is proposed, that is considered, and that's why it still stays in the guidelines. But I just wanted to make that clarification, just add a little bit as to why we approached it this way. But it still does matter. It still does mean something. It's just we had to shift the approach to this district because of its eclectic nature, and then also what was written into the resolution that we needed to follow regarding height, and then also regarding considering its eclectic nature and growth. I'm not sure, Rob, you probably have the direct language that was included in the resolution. It's also in your packet. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions for staff? Okay, now I get to ask my question. Can you just sort of confirm for me that the process, if we were to adopt these guidelines as they are, where things are identified as contributing and non-contributing, if there was a demolition that would come to us, even if the property was identified as non-contributing as part of this, correct?
Chair Bjornberg, that's correct. A demolition, which per zoning code is the removal of 60% or more of a building. Any alteration would come through a certificate of appropriateness. If a property owner met that 60% or more, they would also have to include findings in that certificate of appropriateness for a demolition.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I will now open the public hearing for this item, and I will go off of this list if you have signed up. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anybody's names. So first, I have Lori Saurin. And if you could please state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon. I'm Lori Savrin. And up until a year ago, I lived in Linden Hills, and now I live at 3820 Grand Way in St. Louis Park. In the early 2000s, the Marcy Homes neighborhood began experiencing dramatic growth, and in 2003, the Neighborhood Association developed a master plan to address their concerns. In 2011, a Mead and Hunt historic inventory for the city's central core mapped out the Dinkytown Historic District. In 2012, Marcy Homes began an extensive public engagement process to update its master plan. The plan emphasized Dinkytown's unique character as one of the neighborhood's primary assets and recommended that new development would respond and contribute to the unique character of the Dinkytown area. At the same time, the City of Minneapolis initiated Dinkytown Business Plan, a policy document produced in partnership with Dinkytown businesses and property owners and the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association to guide land use and development in the Dinkytown Business District for the next 20 years. The two plans were approved together as one document in 2014. That year, the HPC responded to neighborhood objections to the proposed demolition of a large section of the Northwest 4th Street block. It issued a moratorium on the classic commercial vernacular 3-unit, one-story building at 1319 4th Street Southeast and initiated a historic designation study for Dinkytown. At a highly successful Dinkytown fundraiser that year at the Varsity, then Councilmember Fry, Pat Coleman, one of the Minnesota Historical Society, and Cecily Marcus, director of the Performing Arts Archive at the university, spoke in support of the protection of the district. The designation study mapped two periods of significance. The HPC approved the 1899 to 1972 period of significance and boundaries recommended by CPAD staff. That's in the black dots of the report. The City Council, however, selected the 1899 to 1929 period of significance and boundaries, and that's in the red dotted line in the report, termed the streetcar era to allow for student housing development. The guidelines were first drafted in 2016 by CFED staff and completed in 2019 by Winter and Company, a committee consisting of building and business owners, neighborhood organization representatives, and architectural historians worked with CPED. The 2016 guidelines included guiding principles for the district, a description of the design review process, and different treatment categories related to the character defining features, all requested by the business owners as a basis for their approval of the historic district. There was a subsequent CPED draft of the guidelines in 2020, and now the 2024 draft before you. It's been 9 years since the process was initiated. We appreciate that Andrea Burke and Rob Stalecki are finally bringing the guidelines to fruition. And I should just say a little bit about myself. I'm still a practicing attorney, and I was president of the library board when we built that library just down the street. And I was the business owner of Savrin Rusoff Bookstore by the Varsity Theater where the loft was started. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Barbara Cam. And just a reminder to please focus on new information. We have all of your written comments as well.
My name is Barbara Cam. I live at, here. Can you hear me? My name is Barbara Kam. I live at 423 7th Street Southeast. I was on the executive committee of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association for 6 years, and I'm one of the founders and a current present member of the board of Preserve Historic Dinkytown. I was at the designation hearings and part of the committee that worked with CPED on the guidelines, the initial guidelines. We have some concerns about this 4-block business district that is Dinkytown and is a historic resource directly connected to the University of Minnesota and the Marcy Homes residential neighborhood. And the concerns are related to the change in the status of key Dinkytown historic districts from contributing to non-contributing. The one-story commercial vernacular brick building that anchors the northwest corner of the 4th Street and 14th Avenue intersection, defining the district, is one of these buildings. Rob Stalecki's research indicated that it was remodeled to one story and refaced by a master mason in 1930, missing the period of significance by 1 year. With student housing developments on both ends of the block, this corner building now constitutes virtually half of the remaining commercial space and frontage, comprising 6 of the 11 commercial spaces. Changing the building to non-contributing is a pivotal threat to the district's integrity and character. The second building, the Varsity Theater, has been listed as a potential landmark in several resource studies and inventories. As Commissioner Howard said, it was Liebenberg and Kaplan were involved in actually the remodeling in the Art Deco style in 1938. And this theater is the flagship of Dinkytown's landscape. The third building is related to the diner that became Al's Breakfast in 1950. The period of significance has the potential to impact this most popular asset of Dinkytown. It was established in 1940 and has a common wall with an adjacent building. The National Register does differentiate between contributing and non-contributing buildings in terms of the process for demolition, as an aside. There are other difficulties with the current period of significance. The streetcar era did not end in 1929. In fact, streetcar use intensified throughout the Depression and war years when gas was scarce. Dinkytown remained the hub connecting the university to the city, and the last streetcar stopped running in 1954. The 1929 Depression did not define Dinkytown's economic and socio-historic context. The city's new modern historic context study notes that speculative building did not cease in 1929. Major investments in these buildings in 1930 and 1938 show that Dinkytown was still a hub of commercial activity. Dinkytown as a name did not exist in 1929. The first Minneapolis directory record of the name was in 1940 with a listing of Dinkytown Dime, with Dinkytown in 2 words. The Dinkytown Business Association history traces the one-word use of the name Dinkytown to the association's founding in 1948. An unofficial suggestion to request an amendment to the period of significance came from a past president of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association. It was to change the end date of the period of significance to 1945. That date signifies the end of World War II and is a compromise between 1929 and 1972. CPED could follow the model for the National Register's substantive amendment process, which allows for revisions to the period of significance, but does not require revisiting the designation process itself. We ask that HPC pass the guidelines without changing the status of these buildings to non-contributing and provide time for staff to bring options to the table for an amendment to change the period of significance. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, I have Kristen I. Tollefson.
Good afternoon. I'm Kristen Tollefson, 2006 Humphrey graduate and policy coordinator for PhD, and I am co-founded the Book House in Dinkytown in 1976. So my address is 1316 4th Street Southeast. For 47 years, I've listened to stories from students, alumni, Dinkytown visitors, bohemians, and characters about how much Dinkytown means to them in their years at the University of Dinkytown, influenced their lives and identities. People of all kinds love Dinkytown, and this is why I became a co-founder of Preserve Historic Dinkytown and am still at it. For 40 years, not much changed in the C1 zone commercial district. Small business and franchises came and went to meet the changing times and needs of the students in Dinkytown, which immediately abuts the U of M Old Campus District. Then in 2012, with development pressure on all sides, Dinkytown was rezoned, like many areas of the city, to C3 mixed use with the goal of increased density. From 2012 to 2023, 846 student housing units have replaced 2/3 of the northeast block of Dinkytown, the Marshall UTech Business Incubator, and over 1/3 of the northwest block, demolishing over 30 surface parking spaces and nearly 100 businesses, 85 in the UTech Center alone. The Book House has had to move our retail and online operations 3 times, finally consolidating our operations in the oldest building in Dinkytown. The Book House is the last remaining bookstore in Dinkytown. The version you have before you is the 4th draft of the guidelines. Is noted in the guidelines themselves. It's a technical document, depending on help from staff to interpret and implement. And though not particularly user-friendly, the version no doubt creates a more efficient foundation for staff management of the historic district. And Rob's research has contributed valuable information to the 4 square blocks of Dinkytown. As addressed in our previous testimony, Preserve Historic Dinkytown's primary concern is the proposed change in status of 2 key historic character features of Dinkytown from contributing to non-contributing. This is not a minor change to the designation. It is controversial and consequential. Almost 1/3 of the 22 designated contributing features were changed. Altogether, we appreciate the challenge and the approach established in the guidelines, that project proposal review does not differentiate between contributing and non-contributing buildings to allow for adaptive flexibility. On paper, this looks reasonable and reassuring. However, given the realities of continued development pressure in Dinkytown and provisions of the ordinance, our fear is that this is unlikely in real time to provide sufficient protection for those defining historic resources. The threat of changing the status of these key resources is real. To reality check our own concerns, I asked a local firm with a history with development projects in Dinkytown if developers consider, if it makes a difference to developers whether a building is contributing or non-contributing. His answer was absolutely, it makes a difference, absolutely. Under Article 8, Historic Resources 599440 and 599460, the planning director is granted the administrative authority to decide the historic status of a resource. The Dinkytown guidelines propose to establish key Dinkytown resources as non-contributing. The ordinance says, if the planning director determines that a property or building does not qualify as an historic resource, the building permit, presumably for demolition, shall be approved. This is the expectation of developers. Under the duties and powers of the HPC is the authority to adopt design guidelines for landmarks, historic districts, and conservation districts, and to revise design guidelines. We ask the Commission to set aside the section of the guidelines that changes the status of these character resources for further consideration. We also request that you ask staff to investigate specific steps that would be involved to extend the period of significance to 1945 or even 1972. The greatest efficiency would be to avoid the targeting of these resources for development in the future. So the concept has come up in the Commission of an alternative of eliminating the contributing and non-contributing designations, but if which is an interesting idea. But I just wanted to say that the designation study identifies the original designation study identifies and discusses 3 periods. Dinkytown is unique, quote unquote, for several reasons. It exemplifies history from the early railroad era, the streetcar era, and the post-war era. and it includes a continuum of elements across all three eras as well as unique characteristics of each. Both the commercial streetcar era and the post-war era are particularly underrepresented presently in designated properties within the city. We believe that the original designation study can support an extension of the streetcar era period of significance to 1945 without altering the boundaries or discussion of the history and resources. Buildings outside the streetcar era were built 1947 and later, and properties intended for development have been fully built out. Extending the period of significance to 1945 would resolve the issues we have raised and align the period of significance with the actual historic period of the streetcar era and the naming of Dinkytown as a commercial district. We know there are procedures and forms for amending designations at the national level, and that technical and substantive, the simplest form being a continuation sheet which allows for changes in period of significance if the boundaries are not affected. We greatly appreciate your consideration of our concerns and our extended commitment to this process. Thank you.
Thank you. The last name I have on the list right now is Eric Wunderlich.
Good afternoon. I'm Eric Wunderlich. I live at 413 5th Street Southeast. I've been on the board of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association, on the executive committee, vice president, and I am currently on the board of Preserve Historic Dinkytown. I will point out that Dinkytown is a thriving neighborhood adjacent to the University of Minnesota. It's where a lot of university students are introduced to the big world, coming in from across Minnesota, and international students. And the history of Dinkytown that a lot of us think about, and what makes Dinkytown a unique place, not only the end of the streetcar at the University of Minnesota, but also the significant things that happened in the post-war period. Important people that are referenced in the study, names that people might recognize: Willie Murphy and Spider John Corner, Frederick Manfred, Walter Mondale, Hubert Humphrey, a guy called Bob Dylan. These are significant things that we think about what makes Dinkytown unique and what it is. All of this other stuff is unique and important, but part of the reason to have historic districts is to further educational and cultural enrichment. And I think to ignore this important, significant period as a period of significance for Dinkytown is a significant oversight. When the guidelines were adopted and then changed, or the initial study and then the suggestion of the guidelines was changed from 1972 to 1929, there was some testimony that was given that was, frankly, I find disingenuous in discounting this significant period, talking about, quote, some shootings at Kemp University and hippies protesting. And I think when we look back at the presidential elections in 1968 and 1972 and what was going on, it's very significant, and Dinkytown is recognized as a hub of this activity. I believe that changing the period of significance to 1972 would address the concerns about the northwest corner of 14th and 4th and the Varsity Theater and Al's Breakfast. Those significant changes to those properties happened well before 1972, and there are no other properties on the inventory that would be changed. They had dates of 1984, 1986, 1992, so none of those would be changed by changing the period of significance to 1972. So I would ask the commission to direct staff to do research, do whatever, to see if we can change that, revise that to 1972, and see if the city council resolution can be amended to reflect that period. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who want to speak? Please state your name and address for the record.
Will do. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mike Richardson, 319 15th Avenue Southeast. I'm representing the University of Minnesota today. I want to thank staff for the work that they have done. It's a long road to get to this point. Obviously, the university has a long relationship with Dinkytown, proximity, but a lot of emotional connections as well. I'm not going to repeat everything that's in the letter. You've read it. You have it in front of you. But I did want to speak based on a comment that staff made a little while ago. University does have some concern about the demolition review process, and it sounds like what staff was saying earlier is that all properties within the district would come to this body to be reviewed. That's not what I understood from the code, so I guess that's a question of clarification. It seemed like it was based on a determination of whether it was a historic resource, and that may or may not be guaranteed depending on the determination granted before it would come to this body. So just generally, the university is interested in making sure that any of these key properties, such as the varsity or the property in the northwest corner that was addressed before where Tony's Diner is now, comes to this commission for review prior to any demolition permit being issued. It seems like it's possible that it could be determined that it's a historic resource and come here, but it's not a guarantee. So those are my comments, just requesting, I guess, clarification on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any, please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Doug Donnelly. I'm pastor of University Baptist Church, which is at 1219 University Avenue. We built that building in 1922, but we had a previous building just on the corner of 4th and 13th since 1890. So we've been long-time Dinkytown residents. I appreciate the work that staff did on finally getting us these design guidelines. It's been a long time coming. I was on the Marston Homes Neighborhood Association, Preserve Historic Dinkytown, also the Small Area Plan Group, and people put in countless hours of blood, sweat, and tears. And so I'm glad it's finally coming to this fruition. I would support my colleagues' suggestion of a amendment to the process to be able to have to redefine the quote-unquote streetcar area beyond 1929 to 1945 or 1972. I would support both of those. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, let's discuss. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really unfortunate, of course, that the period of significance got limited so much, and I think many of that us in the room feel that, and that it seems like that decision is final. That being said, I appreciate what the staff has done to make the guidelines a lot more understandable and accessible for people. I think that the existing versus new construction take makes sense from the layman. There is clearly some hang-up around the contributing versus non-contributing buildings, and I'm wondering if there's a possibility to either omit that table that says contributing versus non-contributing, or if that can't be possible, if we can maybe put a note in the guidelines for existing buildings just saying that this covers both contributing and non-contributing buildings.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Are there other commissioners? Commissioner Howard.
I, too, want to just express some appreciation for the staff. You've been dealing with an untenable situation put upon you by a city council who I would like to think was just naive in that decision. My true feelings of that, I'll leave to myself. But I also, you've been dealing with just an impossible situation with this property. And I want to thank all of the public who are here and who've been in this process since before I was a commissioner, when I was still at SHPO. It's because of you that we can even see these today, even though we still think there's problems with it. I love that you love the neighborhood and that you're fighting for it. It is such a vibrant, vibrant cultural district, and I want to see that vibrancy retained as it continues to evolve. I feel a little better knowing that the varsity is likely individually eligible. I would suggest that Al's probably is too. I don't know as much about the corner building. That one I can't say offhand, but so I feel a little bit better about that. In the end, I disagree with the approach in the guidelines. None of this follows any of the best practices that I teach when I'm out doing training with folks. You've been forced into using it this way. I don't agree with treating contributing and non-contributing buildings the same way. And I don't agree with the period of significance on this, but we can't change that in the guidelines. It has to be done through a formal amendment process of some sort. And our ordinance doesn't have an amendment process, so we're kind of stuck. I would encourage whatever happens today that you all talk to your city council folks, because they can also initiate a change in a designation. It goes through if I understand, as a brand new designation process. But the city council members can initiate that process. And if this is something that you want to continue trying to push for a change in a period of significance, they are an entity that can start that process for us. So I don't know, lots of rambling. I have lots of feelings. I'm going to keep most of them to myself, but I think you get the idea.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. I will echo a lot of the sentiments I heard. I will also say that the first HPC meeting that I ever went to was about a Dinkytown building, so I have a lot of love for this area specifically, and I do think that we're all sort of in a tough position in that the HPC, agreed with this larger period of significance, and that was what was set forward. And then sort of, despite everybody's best effort, that was changed. And now we are sort of trying to do the best with what we were given. And that is a smaller area and a smaller period of significance, which is a huge challenge. I think I'm very interested to hear sort of the other comments from commissioners, and I'm not really sure if staff want to weigh in on sort of like the possibilities of removing that contributing, non-contributing. I guess I'm also sort of hearing that a lot of the properties that are in question or identified as non-contributing in there are, to the best of our hopes and knowledge, possibly individually eligible, and so they would be coming before staff or before us if there were changes proposed. Staff, do you have comments?
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. The HPC can choose to take it out of the design guidelines. It doesn't mean it goes away. It still lives. It just doesn't live in the guidelines. The guidelines is just a place for it to live, so it is more accessible to the public, as versus people calling us or emailing us saying, is this building contributing or non-contributing? What does it mean? In this case, it's there, it's public, it doesn't change the status. We're still going to have a contributing, non-contributing status for this district because we have to, and it still does play into the way these guidelines were approached for existing historic features, non-historic features, and new construction. In the way the flexibility is approached, it's so I mean it's up to you. It just but to make it clear, it doesn't make it go away. It just makes it live somewhere else in our file folders versus in a document that's open to the public. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there other comments? Commissioner Hare.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. I had a question about Commissioner Fisher's statement that there was no language in the guidelines to differentiate between contributing and non-contributing. It possibly might be on page 6 of the document, page 14 of the PDF that was distributed under section Understanding These Design Guidelines, bullet point 2. Is that the clause that you had intended to be added?
Yes, it's just not in the place that I'd expected it, but that would be essentially the same language I would use.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't language affecting ordinances, which is out of our control.
Thank you, Commissioner Hare. Other thoughts, comments? I'm not sure anyone's ready to make a motion. Thoughts, comments? I was like, I can keep saying that for a while. Commissioner Booty.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. This is more of just some random thoughts that I'm just writing down, because there's a couple layers that we're experiencing here, which sounds like the period of significance obviously is not something that we have the ability to modify at this point in time. And so it feels like we're backed into a corner almost in a certain way where obviously we have to follow certain standards with the period of significance that was adopted by the City Council, but it's obviously frustrating for, as has been stated. So I guess my feelings of the contributing versus non-contributing aspect of it all is, theoretic, like hypothetically, if we are to review a project that is technically on a non-contributing building, but has maybe some historic features on it that, or might have I guess that's where I'm kind of running into of like, if we were to enforce or have a finding that says we want this preserved, but it's technically on a non-contributing building, that that's where I'm running into that issue of, which is not something that we can help. So I guess that's my thoughts. I don't know if I have anything else to contribute than just kind of feels like we have to, or not we have to, but we, there's a element of this all that's operationalizing the historic district for the staff and getting something out there that is for staff as well as for community members to navigate through. And I think that it does read very simply, and it does have, I like that the first step on the instruction process is talk to staff, because that's going to be a great part of navigating through this as well. But, as it is written, I feel like I support, how it's written.
Thank you, Commissioner Booty. Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. I have a question. I'm wondering, maybe the staff can provide clarification, but if the HPC were to approve these guidelines today and there were to be an appeal made to City Council, and City Council did, for whatever reason, decide to extend the period of significance, could modifications be made to these design guidelines, or would these be set in stone for the rest of time? I'm just curious if people have thoughts.
Andrea?
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Fisher. If I understand your question correctly, Commissioner Fisher, is if these guidelines got adopted today, and by appeal, do you mean at some point in the future, a council member decided to make a motion to study the district for a larger boundary and period of significance, what would happen to these?
Correct.
These would live, if these got adopted today, these would live as they are adopted today until a point where if a council member or a mayor or the planning director or an HPC commissioner, as currently written in the ordinance, wanted to come through, make a motion to basically start off at the beginning and have another boundary, propose a new district, resurvey, restudy, re-come up with contributing, non-contributing, that would have to go through its whole process, start to finish. As I understand it, based on the way our ordinance reads, and I'm basing this off of what happened in Warehouse District. That district was designated earlier. The boundary was expanded at the same time. It was expanded to match what was already listed in the National Register for the Warehouse District. At those time, we also had warehouse design guidelines. They were rewritten then based on a larger boundary to incorporate more buildings. So basically, the process started over at the beginning. Would I need to get verification from attorneys on all of this? Absolutely. But at this point, that's what we've been able to come up with given the way our ordinance is written and what is the possibility of that happen, because the HPC and staff cannot change the council action. Only the council can change a council action. So these would live on until one point in the future they could be updated, just as we have recently updated other design guidelines. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. And
Thanks.
I only asked because obviously this process has been going on for some time, and time is of the essence. There are a lot of developments and changes being made in the district, so I understand that it is imperative to act somewhat quickly. So thank you for answering that.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Yeah, I think I will continue to add thoughts. I feel like this is very challenging because, like, what we are here to talk about today is the adoption of these guidelines, not necessarily what is contributing or non-contributing, or what the period of significance is, or what the boundaries are, because that decision was made in 2015. I'm like before most of us, if not all of us. And I think that it sounds like we sort of are all, I don't know, disappointed in that decision and wish that it was a different boundary and a different period of significance. And I think from my perspective, it's at least helpful to understand that moving forward with these guidelines wouldn't necessarily eliminate the future possibility of, either looking at properties individually that are not within this, or not that anybody wants to do all of the great work that had already happened, but that could also still happen, and that additional significance that is sort of like widely being acknowledged here could be sort of officially recognized. So it feels like this is, a very small step in a process that has been going on for a long time, and hopefully is at least a step in the right direction, even if it isn't sort of the best case scenario. Any other thoughts?
Well, to get us to the point where we can vote since we're just still kind of just thinking about everything. I'll make a motion that the Heritage Preservation Commission adopt staff findings and adopt the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District Design Guidelines as they're written.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner Merrill. Any further discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk call the roll?
Commissioner Booty,
Aye.
Hare,
Nay.
Howard,
Nay.
Fisher,
Aye.
Merrill,
Nay.
Chair Bjornberg.
Aye.
There are 3 ayes and 3 nays.
I'm going to look at staff or the clerk.
That motion does not.
That motion fails. So that motion fails. So are there any other motions? Or questions, or staff, would you like to?
I think I want, Chair Bromberg, if you, I just want to say, that you guys can choose if it fails, and, there's basically 3 options. It's either you adopt them, you don't adopt them, or you continue it. But, continue it with something that we can reasonably do. We cannot change a period of significance. Staff, like I said, staff in the HPC aren't able to do that. You can make modifications, but if you choose to not adopt it, this dies today, and it will not come back. And we will then, we'll continue using the standards as the review, which we have been doing for 9 years on the district. But I just wanted to make that clear, as those are the 3 options: adopt, not adopt, or continue.
For clarification on that, if you continue to use the standards, are those applied equally to non-contributing and contributing?
That's correct.
Thank you. Commissioner Hare.
My question being whether contributing and non-contributing language be striked from the design guidelines, as the clause mentioned on page 6 that these guidelines do not differentiate between contributing and non-contributing, and they are subjective to the same guidelines. Just remove all of that language from the document, and the document just is that the guidelines apply equally to all properties within the period of significant boundary.
Thank you, Commissioner Hare. I will sort of try to answer this and then also look to staff to. It's my understanding that the language of what is contributing and non-contributing already exists, whether it's in this document or not. And so removing it from the document doesn't change how the guidelines are applied. It just changes that people will have to reach out to staff to ask if something is contributing or non-contributing. I think that's my read.
I'm going to take your look to me as the answer. That is correct. So, I mean, contributing and non-contributing is going to live regardless. It is. And the whole reason I think there's a lot of tension in this is because the district was initially studied to 1972. When it got cut to 1929, the contributing and non-contributing from 1972 didn't apply anymore because we can't say a building that was significant, let's say built in 1960, is contributing to a district that has a significance of 1899 to 1929. It's not a thing. It's not possible. So that had to switch. And there were definitely situations in this study that had to happen. And so that's how the numbers got changed. And then that's how one way we looked at building permits, we looked at historic photos, we looked at lots and lots of information to try and make, and I'm going to say this as delicately as I can, to try and make this period of significance work, because as Commissioner Howard said, it was impossible to make this happen with a late change like that to a district that was studied and already had a contributing, non-contributing for a larger period of significance to just then abruptly, I mean, not abruptly, I mean, we did tons and tons of research into it to try and make it fit to 1929 because a lot of these buildings have had so many alterations. Again, which is why we wrote the guidelines and took this approach, because we needed something that had to be a little bit more different and more flexible to make it work. So again, like you can choose to keep it in or not keep it in, but it's not going to make too much of a difference whether or not, unless it comes to, we're still going to use that, and that factors into a lot of our decisions. But that's how we do it for all of our other design guidelines today. So what we did is basically put into words what we're doing for everything else in the city of Minneapolis. I also just wanted to touch on a comment from the public earlier about historic resources. The section that was being referenced about historic resources and the commission approving or a permit, historic resources in our ordinance refer to properties that have not been designated. Properties that are designated are not, by the language, a historic resource. That section is applying to, I'm going to use a term in front of it, potential historic resources that are coming for demo, and that's where that's happening. Developers, property owners can still apply for demolition in a historic district. It just gets considered as a certificate of appropriateness, and it doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. I just wanted to touch on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Commissioner Merrill.
What is the effect of continuing?
So my understanding is that if we continue this item, we would continue it to our next meeting, and at our next meeting would continue the conversation. So there would be another
doesn't appear that the
staff presentation, and then we would have the discussion again.
Okay. So it doesn't appear that there's going to be any new information forthcoming.
Unless we continued it with direction to have staff do something. But I think that
doesn't seem staff can do any more than they've already done.
Yes, I believe Andrea was.
It was a tough decision. I commend staff for all the work that they've done. I just have these issues that everybody has.
Are there any changes that people would want to see to the guidelines as they're written? Is there any direction? Commissioner Hare.
I'd like to make a motion that the HPC adopt staff findings and the guidelines with the section understanding these guidelines be incorporated into a more at the beginning of the document where they talk about how to use this document.
Staff.
Chair Berenberg and Commissioner Hare, that would be a continuance. If you want something changed, you would have to continue it, and I would recommend no fewer than 2 cycles. No more. No few. Give us at least 2 cycles. If you would like a change in there, so that then we could bring it back to have you take a look at it again. I think, yeah, because we did that for Lyndhurst too. I'm just wondering if we would have to send it back to SHPO for another 60-day review. I don't think so in this case. Washburn Fair Oaks was a little different because it was such a minor change in terms of we had to switch a couple names, which was, and then I think the date on the document. For something a little more substantial, you would make a motion to continue. However, I think because you made the motion, there would have to be, it has to follow through the cycle. Either there is a second, or if there's not a second, motion fails. Thank you.
Is there a second? The motion fails. I'll ask again. Any thoughts? Either Commissioner Booty?
Thank you, Chair Bromberg. So I'm just going to lay out 2 lines of thinking here. So one line of thinking is that we adopt these guidelines today and they are in place, and there are other options outside of this adoption process that may address a lot of the concerns. Every concern I think that a lot of the concerns we have, maybe not every concern, but about the district and how best it may be preserved. The other line is that they fail or are continued. Maybe there's 3 lines. They fail. The city staff are then continuing to review projects in this district under the Secretary of Interior standards, which they does differentiate between contributing and non-contributing, or does not. Sorry, that does not. Sorry, I had that in my notes. So very similar to what these guidelines are, but the guidelines here have been worked on through many different public processes and have had a lot of input into them to get them to where they are today. The third option is to continue it at least 2 cycles. There are 4 commissioners that are not here. There are potentially other opinions on this. That being said, we had a great turnout of the public today. They all gave their great testimonies, and there's a lot of people are busy. Their lives are to come back down here and to have that again for continuation purposes. I'm not sure the other commissioners. I can't speak for them, but we're going to have the same issues going on in our discussion whenever we continue it. And so with that being said, I will make another motion to see if people are interested in this, is to that the Heritage Preservation Commission adopt the Dinkytown Commercial Historic District guidelines.
So sorry to interrupt, Chair Bornberg, but because you're making the same motion, essentially we would have to then do a motion to reconsider, which would be made by someone who voted in the affirmative, and then a second from someone in the affirmative. And then a simple majority of that would lead us to then make a the motion again, essentially. So there's two parts to the motion.
So
Thank you for that.
the official motion is a motion to reconsider the previous motion since I voted in the affirmative.
Is there a second to reconsider?
Fisher seconds.
Do we vote on that then?
Yes, so now I will take a vote on the motion to reconsider. Commissioner Booty,
Aye.
Hare,
Aye.
Howard, Fisher,
Aye.
Merrill,
Aye.
Chair Bjornberg.
Aye.
There's 6 ayes.
That motion passes. So now I believe that we need somebody to make that motion again. Oh, we do not.
It's now before the body.
I should have turned
Wait.
Ready to take a vote? Commissioner Booty,
Aye.
Hare,
Aye.
Howard, Fisher,
Aye.
Merrill,
Aye.
Chair Bjornberg.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes and 1 nay.
That motion passes. That concludes our public hearing items. Thank you all. Do commissioners or staff have any announcements? Staff.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. Forgive me, I can't seem to pronounce your name this evening, so my apologies. I should have introduced myself in the beginning, but Andrea Burke, supervisor for the Historic Preservation Team. The Preserve Minnesota Conference is open for registration. It will be on September 18th through the 20th in Red Wing. I encourage all commissioners to take a look at the agenda for the conference and the sessions. We have staff presenting sessions at the conference. And I wanted to mention that often, most years, we do get some scholarships from the Certified Local Government Program for commissioners and staff to attend. We aim to give first dibs to commissioners, and so as I get more information on that, I will let you know. But if you are planning to attend and would like to stay overnight, hotel registrations are open. There's a block, and I can send more information on that. Anybody from the public can also attend as well, but that is happening. The first meeting of the African American Heritage Work Group meets next week on Tuesday at the public library. So this has been an effort, a lot of work in the making. Many thanks to Aaron and Rob for coordinating this, and to our clerks who have provided tremendous assistance in coordinating this as well. But those meetings kick off next week, and this is an appointed body who will serve to provide comment and guidance on the African American historic and cultural context study that has started in Minneapolis. Also, a reminder that open appointments will be opening soon. It was going to be a month earlier this year, and they open on September 1st. Letting you know well in advance. We often try to initiate a recruitment effort for HPC commissioners. We have 4 seats that are up for reappointment. Still waiting to hear back from all commissioners who are up for reappointment, whether or not they will be returning or not. I've heard from a few. I will not name names, but wanted to mention that. That is coming up, and applications will open, like I said, on the 1st. They go through the 30th, and I will continue to give reminders on that as well. No further updates. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't know if you have said this before, but will we be getting updates from the work group?
Chair Bjornberg, haven't decided on that yet, or haven't, I wouldn't say decided, haven't made haven't figured that out yet. I think it's something I need to coordinate with Aaron, but it is an official work group separate from the HPC. It just happens to be coordinated through the same team that also staffs the HPC.
Does that mean that it will also be public noticed and it is open to the public, and that there will be meeting minutes?
Chair Bjornberg, that's correct.
Thank you. Any commissioner announcements? All right, with that, we have completed all items on the agenda for this meeting. I'll ask once more if there are any other matters to come before this meeting. There being no other business, and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. The next regular meeting of the HPC is Tuesday, August 6th, 2024. Thank you all.